And over the next few weeks, you were losing weight. What do you have? Well, you've got Clagg's #1 authority. So you're going to find out. Well, as I say, you are feeling ill. You have an undulating fever, and you have just come back from Malta. You share your symptoms first with your 94-year-old grandmother, who promptly says, "It sounds to me as if you have Bang's disease. We used to see it when I lived on the farm." Grandma is hardly ever wrong about these things, so you get out America's #1 medical authority from the Clegg crowd and look up Bang's disease in the index. Nothing there. No mention of Bang's disease. There's no mention of Bang's disease, so you turn to the glossary. And again, there's no mention of Bang's disease. You go and tell Grandma. Grandma says, "Well, we always called it Bang's disease, but old Dr. Osprey used to call it brucellosis. Check that out in Clagg's compendium." So you turn to the B's in the index, no mention of brucellosis. So you turn to undulating fever, no mention of undulating fever. And you turn to Malta fever, and no mention of Malta fever. None of it's there. No luck. There's no brucellosis item in the index or in the glossary. So you check under fever, and FUO, fever of unknown origin. Nothing there either. Clegg and his 123 colleagues between them have missed brucellosis entirely, and that's too bad. Because if undiagnosed and untreated, said the U.S. Public Health Service back in 1977, and I have a document from them at that time, the disease can be read as follows. And it says that if brucellosis is left untreated, it can present, well, here I'll read to you, chronic forms of brucellosis in the form of splenic abscesses, bone and joint diseases with abscess formation, renal disease, and bladder disease are all late complications usually occurring 10 to 20 years following the episode of brucellosis. And so, using America's #1 authority, you would never know you had brucellosis. And if it went untreated, later on down the line, you could be faced with some of these more tragic and serious diseases. Pretty serious stuff. Yet there is nothing about any aspect of brucellosis in America's #1 medical authority by Clegg and his colleagues. Just why is that? Well, there are a few hints right off the bat. Right off the bat, if you look at the cover here, it says, John Hopkins Hospital, ranked #1 in America by a U.S. News and World Report survey by the past 12 years old. Now, that's the one I want. Oh, here it is here. John Hopkins garners more National Institute of Health grant money than any other university in America. Now, doesn't NIH know that there's such a thing as brucellosis? If it does, they're not paying attention to what their grant money is going for. Does it now? Do you recall the adage, he who pays the piper calls the tune? Well, the National Institutes of Health pay John Hopkins, and so there, for reasons that we will develop further on, no mention of brucellosis. The term brucellosis has gone down the Orwellian memory hole. And if certain elements of the U.S. power structure have their way, it will disappear from man's consciousness forever. The disease will still be there, and the symptoms and the signs will still be there, but the diagnosis and response will not be there. the American power structure and its make-believe medical authorities, including #1 authority, have a need to preserve and protect the mantra chanters, the doctors, who chorus, "There's no known cause and there's no known cure." End of an interlude. Now, you will recall that just before I digressed to pay tribute to George Orwell, I had referred to Dr. J.D. Colmenero and his colleagues, who in 1996, and I have their paper here, in the respected journal Medicine, had published their study of 530 cases of Brucella malatensis. One would think that by 1999, just 3 years later, when the Clegg crowd edited this, that they would have read that edition of Medicine and would have read about brucellosis and hastily put it into their book. Because Colmenero et al., and again I have the paper here if you'd like to see it, it's very, very interesting. They demonstrate from 530 cases of brucellosis that they treated, well, they put it this way, that there was several patients had bone and joint involvement. Others had genital urinary complications. Others had neurological complications. And their description of brucellosis is almost identical to multiple sclerosis when you see it. It's in the ventricles and demyelination is a principal factor and so on. Heart complications. Now that reminds me of the professor over across the river at Wayne State University. And I tried to think of his name last night, I couldn't. Dr. Lerner of Wayne State University. He had several patients with chronic fatigue syndrome. And when some of them died from other causes, they didn't die of the chronic fatigue apparently, but they died of this, that, or the other thing, he was able to perform autopsies on several of them. And Dr. Lerner said that in the autopsies of victims of chronic fatigue syndrome, he was surprised to find that in their heart there were fibrillary tangles reminiscent of the Alzheimer's brain. Now, how do fibrillary tangles in the Alzheimer's brain get into the heart muscles of chronic fatigue victims? There's something working in the Alzheimer's brain that's working in the heart muscles too. But Dr. Colmenero goes on. Gastrointestinal complications. And everybody knows of the problems that with Crohn's colitis and others. Pulmonary complications and even hematological complications. So here we have a situation where a very real disease with very tragic consequences, especially the consequences that don't materialize until further down the line, is not even in America's #1 medical authority. Why is that? Now, that's a very serious question. Brucellosis is a bacterial zoonotic disease with a protein range of disease presentations that has been dated by medical historians back to the days of the cave dwellers. It is highly contagious, even being able to pass through unbroken skin. As summarized by Buckmeyer in Adams' book, New Advances in Brucellosis, Brucella abortus, malatensis, and sui are closely related members of the same genus. They are extremely infectious pathogens, capable of passing through unbroken skin, have a very broad host range, and can cause a lingering disease in man that is difficult to diagnose and treat. Buckmeyer further observes, Brucella has been difficult to study because of its extremely infectious nature. But poor old Dr. Clegg and his group never got around to noticing it. Now, Bill, could you turn to the next page for me? Thank you. I understand that this artwork is done entirely by hand. There's no machines or automated equipment entered into it at all. I have, at the top, put a rough picture of the Brucella bacteria. It has nothing in the line of organelles, but under certain types of examination, it will reveal a nucleic acid cluster that is in there, and it's a rod-shaped bacterium, and it's walled to start off with. But the evidence that I will be presenting will suggest very strongly, and I hope convincingly, that Brucella bacteria manifests itself as a mycoplasma when the bacteria loses its cell wall. Now, what causes bacteria to lose its cell wall? Well, one thing would be penicillin. And there are other things that can happen that the Brucella bacteria will lose its cell wall, and its genetic material will get dumped into the blood and the plasma. And here is what happened to the daughter of the lady that phoned me from Ottawa. The doctors of Ottawa General Hospital sent a sample of her blood to one of the laboratories, and they said, oh my gosh, PCR shows that there's Brucella genome in her blood. And strangely enough, there's a Mycoplasma fermentis genome. And the two genomes are identical. They're the same thing. Only one's just a fragment of the bacterial genome. It was these qualities of great danger to its victims that made it the bacteria of choice for biowar researchers. Now, I told you about the 500,000 admitted people that were used as test subjects for disease agents. And I told you how these disease agents were put into mosquitoes or on mosquitoes at Queen's University and so on. Well, let me read you something further about it. In 1951, the U.S. Air Force formally standardized Brucella sui biological bomb. Now, the United States has denied biological weapons. But this is on very solid authority. A guy by the name of Ed Regis, using governmental documents that he was able to access, demonstrated quite conclusively that the U.S. military developed biological weapons based upon brucellosis back in the 50s. And we had that from a member of our foundation in Rochester, New York, who was in the military and had been trained in biological warfare. And when he was discharged from the military, they gave him a document which he gave a copy to me. And it says, if in the next 2 years you were to develop multiple sclerosis, you will be deemed eligible for a government military pension because of the nature of the duties you were performing. He was handling Brucella militensis and Brucella sui. And they told him, and I've got the document, I may even have brought it with me too, you will be eligible for a pension from the military, even after you've left the military. Now that's in Adams' book, or at least Buckmeyer et al.'s claim is well supported by a report in the New England Journal of Medicine. Volume 236, number 30, May, etc., 1947. It's entitled, Acute Brucellosis Among Laboratory Workers. And it turns out the authors, Calder and Howe et al., were all military medical personnel working at Fort Detrick, Frederick, Maryland. So brucellosis, you see, was very, very much involved. It was put into an actual bomb that was taken into inventory by the U.S. Air Force, and the evidence is very, very solid that they didn't use this biological